Over here in the very heart of London, we've recently just had broadcast, of course, well, coming up, shall I say, the Royal Variety Performance. And it was one of those sort of things that growing up as a child, if you were a performer like I was, then you really wanted to be part of that show. That was the goal, to appear in front of royalty, preferably at the London Palladium, and preferably, of course, meeting them afterwards. This was the pinnacle, the icing on the cake. And this truly was when there were many different stars, whether that be from the world of circus, dance, magic, comedy, music. There was so much to choose from. When you watch the shows today, everybody's a presenter, an influencer, a reality star. Basically, it's a byword, isn't it, for zero talent. You see, way back in 1961, there was a spectacular Royal Variety Performance, and it led to a friendship that in fact could have been so much more, even with royal approval, but sadly not meant to be. Let me explain. Morning, good to see you. Thank you so much for your time today. Nice to have your company, whatever you're doing. And of course, as I say, royal stories just fascinate me, particularly the world of show business, because when, as I say, you look back at something like the Royal Variety Performance, which that year also had the beautiful Dame Shirley Bassey, looking gorgeous as ever in one of those sparkly frocks and captivating the audience as only Dame Shirley can, well, you look and think, well, who else was on that bill? And there were so many great acts, you know, the Maguire sisters, Lionel Blair. When you look back at the bill, there were so many fabulous acts. Of course, the Maguire sisters, good friend of mine, the late Lionel Blair, which is where this story actually comes from, because Lionel was a terrific storyteller, let me tell you. He knew everybody, and literally for generations, particularly mine, of course, we knew him as being a TV star, as one of the panelists, you know, head people for Give Us a Clue. But he was a superb dancer, choreographer, and been in films, literally done everything. A big friend of Sammy Davis Jr. The stories he told me about himself and Sammy, just simply terrific. But back to the 1961 Royal Variety Performance. Well, that created a little bit of a problem for many people, because this was at the time when the Royal Variety was bringing over huge American stars. No two ways about it. They were massive, but there was none bigger than this guy in a world of comedy, none other than the brilliant Jack Benny. Now, even as a child, I loved Jack Benny for the simple joke that he was perennially 39 years old. Didn't matter what decade he was in, he played his violin and he was 39 and he was sticking to it. Nothing wrong with that. Now, I told you previously how there was an argument with Jack Benny and an English comedian about overrunning and how much time they were allowed against how much time the English comedian was allowed. That's show business. Behind the scenes, you know, not as friendly as you think, all smiles out front, stage cloth. You get the picture. What's interesting about this particular story is that it was literally a friendship born on that stage. That's because the brilliant Jack Benny was absolutely captivated by our own Eric and Ernie. That is, of course, Morecambe and Wise. Now, in 1961, they hadn't quite hit the plethora of what we know them to be today. They'd had their own TV series, Two of a Kind was still successful, but the BBC years were still to come. This is where around about 27 million people on Christmas Day would sit down to watch the Morecambe and Wise show. It was part of our lifestyle in the 70s. You know, everybody watched that show. And as a kid, that's what you talked about when you went back to school after the Christmas holidays. Now, Jack Benny and Eric and Ernie got on incredibly well. And Eric and Ernie had also had the delight of appearing on the brilliant Ed Sullivan Show. But they hadn't exactly cracked through like some other comedians, say like Norman Evans, who'd been incredibly popular, even though he was from the north of England and had a very strong accent. You get the picture. But apparently Jack Benny, according to Lionel, really wanted to do some sort of act and skit with Eric and Ernie. And this was going on right through the 60s. But apparently each and every time their schedules could not get it together, and each and every time there was either a contractual problem. You see, Jack Benny had a deal at the time with the BBC, and the BBC didn't really want their stars overlapping with ATV, which was the home of Eric and Ernie. You get the picture. So that particular thing fell apart. Sadly, as we all know, we lost Jack Benny in 1974. He felt that Eric and Ernie were two of the funniest people he'd ever seen, and this should be right up there with the likes of Hollywood legend Laurel and Hardy. Now that's a really nice compliment from another comedian, but that apparently, according to Lionel Blair, was exactly what Jack Benny was. Oh, and by the way, the Duke of Edinburgh thought Jack Benny was hilarious and always took the joke that he too was perennially 39. As he said, if it's good enough for Jack, it's good enough for me. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.